Okay. 2-minute warning.
Once we get to the question and answer part, y'all raise your hand and I'll pass y'all this microphone right here, okay? All right.
Joe? Hi, everyone. Are we ready? Everybody ready? Okay. Hi, my name is Christy Shane, Chrystishain. I'm the Director of Communications for the South Carolina Department of Corrections. The capital punishment sentence of Stephen Christopher Stanko was carried out tonight pursuant to the order of the South Carolina Supreme Court and in accordance with state law. The execution was performed by lethal injection and began at 6:06 p.m. A second dose of pentobarbital was administered at 6:20 p.m., and he was pronounced dead by a physician at 6:34 p.m. Stanko, 57, was serving 2 death sentences for crimes committed on April 8, 2005, in Horry and Georgetown counties. Tonight's execution was for the shooting, death, and robbery of Henry Lee Turner, 74, of Conway. Stanko also was sentenced to death for the strangulation death of Laura Ling of Murrells Inlet and the attempted murder and rape of her daughter. Stanko's final statement was read to witnesses by his attorney. It is lengthy. I have copies for you, and Joe is passing them out. It's also posted on our SCDC website. Witnesses to the execution included 3 members of the victims' families, a representative from the 15th Circuit Solicitor's Office, which prosecuted both cases, 1 member of the Stanko family, Stanko's attorney, and 3 members of the news media who will address you now. Sorry about the rain. After they speak from the podium, please ask any questions you have of them or me. After we finish, they will not be available for interviews because they have to write their own stories. First, Jeffrey Collins of the Associated Press.
Yes, my name is Jeffrey Collins. I'm with the Associated Press. That's JEFFREYCOLLINS. And I'll just walk everybody through what happened from the beginning to the end. We got into the death chamber at 5:58. Curtains opened just a little bit after 6. Steven Stanko is laying on the gurney. He has his arms stretched out to either side. He has, there's a sheet almost up to about right here, up to the top of his chest. There's lines that run into his arms, and under the sheet looks like towards his chest. His lawyer got up to give his final statement. It was a 3.5-minute long statement. In it, Steven Stanko apologized to his victims, but he also asked not to be judged by what he called the worst day of his life. At 6:06, a little bit after 6:06, they announced that the execution could proceed, and a woman's voice that I have not heard in any execution before announced that the first dose of phenobarbital would begin. Mr. Stanko, let me back up slightly. When the witnesses first came in the room, Mr. Stanko looked over everybody in the room, kind of from one end to the other. At that point, he looked back up at the ceiling for the most part while his lawyer was reading his final statement. He did occasionally he did at least once glance towards his family member who was in the witness room during his final statement. So after they announced the execution would begin, Stanko did look over what would be to his left at the witness chamber again. Looked like he was looking at the victims' family members that were there. He then started saying, you could see his mouth moving like he was maybe talking or praying, but you can't hear what he said, and it's impossible to read his lips. Then he started to do a few breaths, where he'd puff his lips out. All this lasted for maybe a minute from the time the execution started to the time he appeared to stop breathing at 6:07. At that point, at about 6:20, they announced, that same female voice announced, beginning the second dose of pentobarbital. That started. Again, nothing happened that you could see on Stanko. That I couldn't see anything happening to Steven Stanko. I did see, after that was said, you could see the IV line move a little bit and see some liquid maybe go through it, but you couldn't see, there was no movement with Steven Stanko after 6:07. At 6:33, they announced the doctor it was clear for the doctor to come in, put a stethoscope on his chest, and in a few other places looked like he was trying to see if there was a pulse on his neck. And then at 6:34, he nodded his head at the warden, and the warden pronounced him dead at 6:34. Tom, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Tommy Cardinal, TOMMYCARDINAL, with My Ori News, HORRY. At just about 6 o'clock exactly, the curtain was drawn, and we saw Stanko laying down. He was on a metal gurney, and it had a space for his left arm, just a metal rectangle where his left arm was on. He was strapped down pretty heavily. He had a strap at his wrist. He had his tape on his fingers to close his wrist like that, and he also had a strap on his bicep, and he had what looked like a sort of a seat belt strap, a more heavy strap on his shoulders. He had a white blanket up to his chest. The lawyer, when the curtain was drawn, he looked over briefly at the people there and looked back up and was closing his eyes. When the statement read, it took about 3.5 minutes. It was this lawyer. I saw at 6:04, I saw a tear begin to fall down his left cheek, which is, I could only see his left side of his body. At 6:06, I have 6:06 and a little after 6:06, where there was a female voice that said, "First round of pentobarbital will now be administered." When that happened, he started to mouth words. It was unintelligible. You couldn't tell what it was. At that moment, he looked at the witnesses again for a little longer period. I'm sorry, the victims' family members. He looked at them specifically. He took a few deep breaths, normal breaths, very deep and breathing all the way in and all the way out, and then he sort of did another deep breath where his lips sort of fluttered, like maybe raspberries would be a good way to describe it, but that was all in between 606 and 607. And from 607 on, you saw no motion from Mr. Stanko. I think his breathing stopped a little after 607, but he was a big man, and the blanket was over him. You couldn't really see if there was any very shallow breathing, but I could not see anything. It was completely quiet in the witness room. All you heard was shuffling papers and scratching or things like that. And so they announced the first round at 6:06, and they were doing they would say 5-minute timer, and you heard a jingle. It was like it may have been an alarm that would say when 5 minutes after the first dose, and then 10 minutes. And then at 6:20, a female voice said, second round of pentobarbital is now being administered. And then at 6:20, 5 minutes after that, you heard them say 5-minute timer, and then again, 10-minute timer. Doctor came out at 6:33, like Jeffrey said, and he checked his heart with a stethoscope, unbuttoned one of his buttons to check, and he checked both sides of his neck for a pulse. And then at 6:34, they pronounced that he was deceased, and all of the witnesses left the room about one at a time. Lauren can go now.
Lauren Korn, Loren, last name Korn, Korn, with WMBF News in Myrtle Beach, WMBF. They did a good job explaining, so the only thing I have left, I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of the room. I know the AP all had a picture. It's red brick, 3 rows of chairs. You have the victims' families there, and the attorney and the solicitor in the front row. Us, second row, and then jail, or I guess who were they? There's a sled agent and Christie in the back. It was like a little humid in there, 73 degrees, kind of humid, quiet, like they said. He was wearing his glasses the whole time. I found that interesting. I think he wanted to see his family, his brother, and I think the victims and the victims' family members. I think the only one who showed any emotion, to be honest, was the attorney. That's the only one that I could see show any emotion, and she teared up. And after she read his statement, she sat down. He turned over and looked at her, and it looked like he said thank you, kind of like that, thank you. And she said, of course, and blew him a kiss. And like I said, the whole time she showed the most emotion, trying to fight back tears. And then at one point towards the end, she kind of went like this. As far as the other victims' family members, they, to me, looked stoic. I mean, they did not turn away at all. They wanted to see it through. And they did. I think one of them maybe turned away a little bit at the floor, but the rest of the time, they stared the whole time, looked at him. As far as Mr. Stanko, like I said, had his glasses on, and as these two mentioned, he looked up before everything happened to look at the Turners and to look back down, a couple of breaths, and stared at the ceiling and closed his eyes. And he had shallow breaths the rest of the time. You could only see it because of the sheet moving. But I could say that quickly color drained from his face. I mean, he was, normal, maybe even a little red. And then as soon as it started, it drained so quickly that I think at one point it looked almost purple. And his hands, they mentioned that he had tape. They were, no color to them at all. And then I guess that's about it. They took care of the rest. So I don't know if you want to.
If you guys have questions, please get the microphone from Kendrick.
Hi, thanks so much for reporting on this, Jeffrey. Can you just confirm again, I'm sorry if it was lost in the rain, who exactly was in the room?
Yes. So they identified in general, it was Stanko's attorney, and I know her. She's Lindsey Vaughn. She was there for Richard Moore's execution. It was a family member who was introduced as, who was called Mr. Stanko in the room. So then there was a woman, and she was called Miss Ling. And then there was 2 Mr. Turners. So that was the witnesses that are in front of us. Then the 3 media witnesses are in the second row, and the sled agent and Christy Shane are in the back row. Oh yeah, I forgot the solicitor. So between the family member of Stanko and Miss Ling was Jimmy Richardson, the solicitor from the Horry, Georgetown County.
And sorry, just briefly, one more question.
Yeah.
I believe this is your 13th execution you've seen on Friday the 13th.
Yes.
What was there anything? What, if anything, was different about this one?
The actual announcement of the pentobarbital and us being able to hear that was new to this. One thing that also struck me that Lauren mentioned is the color draining from his face. That being said, though, this is the first time I've seen a Caucasian person under the new protocol of lethal injection. So I don't know, and trying to go back through my mind of ones I may have seen during the 3-drug protocol back in the 2000s, I'm not sure, but it was I'd say it was very dramatic. The amount of that drained from him was obvious and perhaps even jarring, you might say. It obviously just drained very quickly out of him. That, and again, the announcements, we could actually hear a little bit of the chatter between the female voice, who I'm assuming was probably back there in the room where the IVs go, and the warden.
Thank you all for witnessing this. What was his last meal?
Stanko's specially requested meal was fried fish, fried shrimp, crab cakes, baked potato, carrots, fried okra, cherry pie, banana pudding, and sweet tea. It was served Wednesday evening.
Thank you.
Just wanting to ask, so is state protocol 1 dose of the lethal injection drugs or 2 doses?
In filings and in court testimony this week, we talked about the 2-dose protocol. It has always been the case, and that protocol was discussed in federal court this week and through the filings in the Supreme Court.
Awesome.
And I can follow up on that to say, in those filings, they mentioned that the second dose is given if there's what they call sporadic cardiac activity, was the way that the lawyers for the prison system called that. So that's what they said they do, and they've done that in the previous lethal injection executions that have happened in the last 9 months.
I'm Ashley with. Oh, did you go ahead?
Well, I was just going to say, at a little before 6:20, there seemed to be people like looking towards one of the men in the chamber, and he sort of gave a nod as far as like like maybe that was them saying that we still see some residual activity in the heart. So we don't know. He nodded, and then the lady said maybe a minute later, a second dose of pentobarbital is being administered.
I'm Ashley with WMBF News. I know you all talked in great detail about the color draining quickly from him. Did he appear to kind of tighten up or fight, what he was experiencing in that moment?
There wasn't like any straining against the restraints. There wasn't like any, in the firing squad, I've seen him jerk when the firing squad, or even when I saw an electrocution, they jerk. Nothing like that this time. I mean, he was laying there. There was no real straining. All you saw was just some, like his lips were moving like that. That was the closest to anything that looked like a strain or any kind of anything else going on.
I know one last question, I'm sorry. After they did pronounce him deceased, what was was there any reaction at all in the room?
No, everything in that room is very quiet. somber. You know, they ask people, it's time when we have to sign a witness form that we witnessed the execution. So they bring us out in an orderly fashion. Nobody, and you know, nobody says anything. They just walk out very quietly. And the family of the victims, as far as I could tell, like Tommy said, there was very little reaction to it. I mean, they stared at Stenko for probably 10 minutes of this stuff. I mean, they didn't look away from him at the beginning of this execution for a long time, all three of them. But there wasn't any like crying or any kind of reaction like that.
Is the time frame for this lethal injection execution different or longer than the last one you witnessed?
It was probably longer by a few minutes. I'm thinking through the earlier ones have been about 20 minutes long, maybe about 21. This one, if my memory serves, is about 24. Let's see, 06 to. They started later, yeah. Because this one would have been about 25, 26 minutes. So it was a little longer, but it makes it a little more difficult for me to compare. Now, the next one, if they announce when the pentobarbital starts, I'll have a better idea of how everything came together. But it took a little bit longer than the first ones, but there was nothing out of the ordinary that I saw.
Awesome. And then just a question for you, Christy. When did the governor, I know we got the email about him denying clemency at about 6:12. When did you guys know that he was denying clemency?
Right away, right at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
When they made the announcement that the execution was going forward.
Okay.
It's maybe 6:02.
Maybe
It was
6:02.
right,
Okay.
right after 6.
Okay.
And I can tell you one of the things the warden does at the beginning of these is, and I actually heard it, like I said, we could hear what happened, so I actually heard it this time, is he asked if there were any clemency or appeals left. And so obviously he was on the headset, whatever answer came over the headset. But yes, that gets asked. It appeared that got asked after the gurney, he's on the gurney and they're getting ready to have his final statement read.
Christy, this question is for you. I'm wondering if you can provide any context for why the procedure was changed this time to include notifications of when the pentobarbital was being injected.
Only to say that we discussed this in court this week and are trying to be as transparent as possible.
Kiana, were you asking on the breathing? Were you asking on the length part, the actual length of the execution itself, or the actual length of time he was breathing?
Really the execution itself, because I know they administered the 2 doses, so I wanted to know, you guys did not believe that you saw a sign of life after the first dose? Is that what you guys?
It was about a minute. Was from the time that they announced the execution is beginning, and you heard the female voice say, "We're going to give that dose of pentobarbital." It was about a minute worth of any signs. Like there was some breathing, and like I said, he looked over, he was saying something, he had those shallow breaths, but maybe a minute from that time to no signs of life. So there was no signs of life from about 6:07 until he was pronounced dead at 6:34.
Awesome. And I'll just ask this, but obviously there's been controversy from different experts that looked at autopsy results of the last lethal injection, and they, made statements that it could be that someone's drowning, in their own fluids. With you guys witnessing today, would you say that that's something you believe you saw?
It's not. It didn't appear to be any different than the other lethal injections I've seen. Part of the difficulty of this is you don't know what that's something that they determine at autopsy. So it's not anything that from what I was visually able to see, I didn't see any signs of discomfort. I didn't see any struggle. I didn't see anything like that, and it looked similar to the other lethal injections I've seen.
Awesome.
For the media witnesses, is this the first time that there was a family member of the inmate? I'm trying to remember.
It's the first time since we restarted since South Carolina restarted executions, there have been family members of inmates before. I'll tell you, one that really stuck with me was Jerry McWee was killed by lethal injection maybe 16, 17 years ago. And his mother would come out every execution and protest and walk the sidewalk and protest. And so when it was her son's time to be executed, she was in that chamber and she watched him go, and he had tears in his eyes as he looked at his mom, and his mom was crying too. So that's one that stuck with me. So it's been done before, just not in the last since it was restarted.
Other questions? The press building will be open for an hour. That means 8:23. We'll be closing up shop. If you need anything, please let me know. We appreciate you being here, and if you have questions, just grab one of us. We'll be happy to help. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
We'll see you, Alice. Get on out here. Do your file. Hey, there you go.